Hey, so it's been about 1 month since I've been using the Apple MacBook Pro 16-inch M1 Max, and I've waited for this laptop for about 2 years. If you know me personally, I've been waiting and delaying as much as I can changing laptops because I knew after the M1 chipset came out, Apple had something in mind with the M1 Pro and the M1 Max. So I thought I'd give it enough time and stick with the Lenovo Legion Y520, which was the laptop I've been using before this, about a 5 to 6 year old laptop that was pretty much beaten to the max and all out dead. I couldn't do anything on the laptop. Using Photoshop would make it crash, using Premiere Pro would make it crash, and the screen was also broken. So I've waited a very long time for this MacBook, and I've got to say it's been one of the best purchases that I've ever made. And I'm going to start off this review by talking about the design of the 16-inch MacBook Pro. Now, to me, when I came from the gaming laptop I mentioned, even though this has a larger chassis than the 14-inch laptop, the MacBook Pro, I feel like it's a very compact device because number one, I wasn't going to make any sacrifices with the display. So I wanted the biggest MacBook out there. So that's why I went for the 16-inch variant. But not only that, for people who think that, the 16-inch is a bit too big, if you're someone who uses a gaming laptop, it's not going to be that big. Granted, it is a bit on the heavier side and a bit thicker than your usual laptops, but I think it more than makes up for it with extremely good internals as well as cooling technology, which we'll get to in just a bit. Although if you're the type of person who cannot sacrifice on that weight and that, large form factor, then you can definitely go for the 14-inch variant because I know a few of my friends who waited for the 16-inch, went with it, thought it was too big, and then shifted to the 14-inch. And I believe those will be the kind of people who maybe have a laptop that's 1 or 2 years old, or perhaps are coming from the M1 powered MacBook Pro, and that portability and that design. If they like that design, then maybe they're gonna find it a bit difficult to adapt to the 16-inch variant, and for them the 14-inch is the way to go. Another thing that I really like about the design of the MacBook Pro is the build quality. The build quality is insanely premium. Everything about it just screams premium. I wish the Apple logo at the back could light up. That's one of my small complaints. Another one is that the front panel, there's no MacBook Pro branding anymore, so it's just a very clean look. Some people might prefer that. Some people might like the logo on the front. I am the latter for laptops, so I wish the logo stayed, but I can see why Apple did this. I assume Apple wants the MacBook Pro to be known as a laptop, or just an Apple laptop rather than a MacBook Pro. And again, the writing staring at you when you're working on it isn't something that everyone likes. And last but not least, in terms of design, the ports. So I told everyone when the Apple MacBook Pro, the previous one, came out, that Apple was going to revert back to providing us with the ports on their machine, and no one believed it. But behold, it's here. All the ports are back. HDMI is back, which is something that I've been using ever since the switch to Type-C USB happened. I've been using HDMI, and I'm glad to see it back. SD card reader is also back, really helpful when it comes to content creation. And MagSafe is back, and I do have some thoughts on MagSafe. I've actually made a video on MagSafe about the MacBook Pro. If you want to check that out, make sure to do so by clicking the card above. But there is a bit of a controversy when it comes to MagSafe on the MacBook, and which we'll get to in sort of the later half of this review. Now, this is going to be a long review because I do have a lot of things to say about the MacBook Pro 16-inch M1 Max. So yeah, let's get into the second thing that I want to discuss, which is the display of the MacBook. As I said, it's a 16-inch panel. It's a mini LED panel. So what's going to happen here is people are going to say that there's blooming issues, and to be honest, yes, if you look out for those issues, you will see them very minuscule. To be honest, to the layman, to the regular person, you can't even notice. But if you're the techie kind of person who looks out for these things, you're gonna see them, but it's not really gonna get in the way. I've been using the 16-inch display of the MacBook for the majority of the time I've had it, and it's been fantastic. The visuals are great for things like movies as well as TV shows, and I've never had any complaints with the panel. It's also a Pro Motion panel, which means you're going to get full 120 Hz support on this panel. Although with this, I have a slight issue. So it's not going to be evident on every single app you run on the MacBook because some of these applications are still not tailor-made for that high resolution refresh rate, which is fine by me. I'm not really the type of person who likes that high refresh rate. Yes, when you switch back to something that doesn't have a high refresh rate, sometimes you do feel the difference, and that's something I've been noticing with the MacBook Pro, and then me going back to my monitor, which is a 60 Hz monitor. So yes, there are some cases where you'll feel the difference was justified, but in other cases, until and unless applications start to take advantage of ProMotion, you're not going to see a massive difference. And I'm okay with that. So that's pretty much all the display apart from one big thing that everyone wants to talk about with the new MacBook Pro, which is the notch. Yes, the notch has returned or sort of been introduced to the MacBook series. And I think there's two reasons for that. Number one, the most obvious one is that they wanted more space for the 1080p camera, which is understandable. Wait, here's a sample of the 1080p camera just for you guys to reference and see how it sounds and how it looks in a general home environment. Okay, so this is sample footage from the front-facing camera, or rather the webcam on the MacBook Pro, 1080p from the notch straight away. Let me know what you guys think about the differences in quality. I definitely think there is a difference in quality between 720 and 1080p, so I appreciate this high resolution bump. But yeah, I'm open to what you guys think down in the comments, and let's get back into the video. Okay, so now that we're back from that sample, I want to say the quality is actually pretty good for the home environment lighting that I was filming in, and the microphones on the MacBook Pro are also insane. They're studio quality and you can easily use them for things like voiceovers. I was going to use it for the voiceover in this video, although with me using the MacBook to record using the microphone, I thought I'd leave it at that, but some of my videos previously on this channel have been recorded directly from the MacBook Pro, so the audio quality from the microphones is absolutely incredible. There's nothing to complain about here. And as far as the notch goes, the second reason why Apple did it is because of brand identity. The iPhone has the notch, and I'm guessing they want their laptops to have this iconic look as well, which I know isn't going to be for everyone, but that's just what Apple does. They give you everything that you want except for that one thing, but you still have to go ahead and buy the product because it's just that good. And that's how I feel about this 16-inch MacBook Pro. So that's pretty much the notch out of the way. Yes, one thing that I am missing is Face ID. That could have been the cherry on top. That could have justified the notch, but we're not going to get it this year. I'm guessing they did that so that when they introduce it to the next MacBook Pro, they don't have to change the design of the MacBook Pro and they can just say Face ID is here. But you do get Touch ID, which is plenty fast and very convenient on a laptop. It's something I didn't have on my personal laptop before this, so I truly appreciate that. Oh, and I've also seen, while we're on the topic of the notch, that people are complaining about elements of different applications going behind the notch. Yes, this is an annoyance and I can see why that's a problem. Apple has fixed it for applications that do not support the notch, so you can be rest assured that that won't be happening anytime soon. There are also other apps that can just black out the top bar so the notch completely disappears, but I haven't used any of these applications. The notch hasn't bothered me at all. All my use cases, the notch has been perfectly fine, just sitting on the top, not being annoying at all. But there is something I want to talk about when it comes to the display, which is the speakers. Now, you can't really talk about the display and not the speakers, and on the MacBook Pro 16-inch, the speakers are fantastic. If you compare it to any other laptop in the market, these are pretty much the best speakers that you can get. They're fuller and richer than even the older MacBook Pro 16-inch, and that's saying a lot. These speakers are just fantastic. I can't reinstate that enough. So you guys just have to try them out for yourself. Even if I show you guys or make you listen to samples, it's not going to do justice to how great the speakers sound. So if you're looking for a multimedia companion, as I said, the display is excellent, the speakers are also excellent, and the 3.5mm headphone jack means that you can have any sort of headphones attached to the MacBook Pro 16-inch if you need it. And that comes in handy for content creation, which we'll also get to in a bit. As we're now slowly transitioning throughout all of the elements of the MacBook, I want to touch upon the keyboard and the trackpad. First of all, that trackpad is once again one of the best trackpads I've ever used. And this is coming from someone who's been using Windows laptops in the past, so I'm sort of getting accustomed to all of this, and I didn't have a Mac before. So this is the best trackpad I've used. When I used to have Windows laptops, I used to think why the trackpad was so big on a Mac, but it's understandable. You can have gestures on the Mac which work pretty flawlessly. You can have the 3-finger swipe, the 4-finger swipe, scrolling, everything is just excellent. And the haptics are also really, really nice. In fact, while I've been editing on the MacBook Pro throughout the last month, I haven't been using a mouse. I've been using the trackpad exclusively to edit all my videos, which isn't something I can say when I use Windows laptops because the trackpads just aren't as good, or I haven't experienced the best Windows trackpad yet. So yeah, the trackpad has been excellent. As far as the keyboard goes, there's one big change, which is that the touch bar is now gone and the touch bar is replaced by real buttons, something that I like. That's a move that I sort of appreciate because I never really liked the touch bar. I know for people who like to do a lot of music creation, you can have your controls on the top, and for general controls, things like brightness, you can do all of that on the touch bar. But for me, it wasn't really necessary, so I like the buttons. Now with the buttons, you do get some shortcuts that are very useful, things like search, voice dictation, all of this is really, really helpful, but there is one shortcut that I'm missing with the function keys on top, which is the fact that you cannot adjust the brightness of the keyboard straight from the keys. So that's something that you have to go to System Preferences in order to configure, which is a bit annoying, but you've got to live with it. Now the keyboard is also blacked out, so there is no metal shining through the keys, so it's all black. That's a design trait that I like once again. And the keys overall are nice to type on. You can get, 2 or 3 hours of continuous work done on the keyboard without having to worry about your fingers fatiguing, all of that. So nice keyboard. I wouldn't say it's mechanical or Razer mechanical switch, gaming keyboard like, but it's definitely doable and you can adjust to it pretty well. I wish the enter key on the right side was a bit bigger because I used to sort of type with my pinky and hit the enter key, and you can't do that on the MacBook as easily. So maybe that's just one design flaw that I'd like to point out. But aside from that, you can definitely get used to it. And number two, for comfort, if you're using the MacBook, let's say on your lap, the edges of the MacBook are a bit sharp, so they sort of hit against your wrist, which again, for long-term use is a bit of an inconvenience. But that aside, yeah, not really a major issue and no real major complaints with the overall typing experience. And with that, let's talk about performance and the lifestyle changes that the MacBook 16-inch has brought into my routine. Before, I used to use a Windows laptop, so the first big change was macOS, which I've adjusted to pretty fine. Everything that I needed has been there, so there's been no issue whatsoever here. And in terms of software and how intuitive it is pretty good. You also get some timely updates, and the updates work for the most part, so all of that has been excellent. I love how accurate the search feature is. That's something that wasn't that accurate on Windows 10 or Windows 11, and everything just flows. Once again, that 120 Hz refresh rate comes into the picture for the operating system. Now, another thing that I want to mention is that when I used to use Windows laptops, I used to have them plugged in. So I used to be able to, do all my work, but I had to sit on my desk for the most part, because if I unplugged the machine, I wouldn't get the full power and I would sacrifice on battery life. And that's one of the biggest reasons why I love this machine. You can unplug it and you still get the same performance you'd get if it was plugged in. Fantastic job from Apple, and I truly love it. Plus the battery life has been insane. I'll touch on that, but before I touch on that, I want to touch on some of my use cases with the MacBook Pro 16-inch M1 Max. And first of all, I can definitely say I'm not taking full advantage of the M1 Max chipset. The chipset is there with 32 gigabytes of RAM just for me to future-proof the machine. This is a machine that I'm going to have for the next 5 to 7 years at least. And if I'm going to continue this field and continue developing my craft, I'd like to have the hardware on my laptop to not be a bottleneck anytime soon, with which the M1 Max isn't going to be. So I am happy with the purchase there. And in terms of some of the things that I do video editing, I do graphics, I'm starting to learn a bit more animation. So all of that is going to be pretty handy when the M1 Max will get even further optimized for all of these programs that you find. Browsing, copywriting, typing, all of that is just a breeze. I use Chrome, and most of the applications I use aren't Apple either. So for my video editing, I use Creative Cloud, and I know Premiere Pro has been optimized for the M1 Max, and it's been an absolute blast. On my previous laptop, I couldn't even edit 4K videos, and now all of my videos are in 4K. I can play them back at full resolution without any problems whatsoever. So this is something that is unprecedented. Really happy with that, really excited for what's to come in the future. Even if I upgrade my camera to an insane camera in the future, I'm pretty sure the M1 Max can handle it just fine. I also want to throw in render times, which have been completely obliterated compared to my previous laptop. So my previous laptop, I used to be able to render a 1080p video in about 15 to 20 minutes, whereas on the M1 Max, the same video at 4K resolution, if I was to, renders in about 3 to 5 minutes. So insane performance. I know a camera comparison that I did, which was about 8 or 9 minutes at 4K resolution. It didn't even render on my previous laptop, whereas on the M1 Max, it rendered in 6 minutes on Premiere Pro as well. So I still haven't gotten into the ecosystem of Final Cut, but perhaps that's something that I can look into in the near future. I do have some complaints though. OBS in particular, something I use for video live streaming, doesn't work as well as I'd like to. So when I first installed OBS, I needed a workaround for it to be able to record the desktop audio that was coming through my MacBook. And the workaround is there, but that's just an extra step that I needed to go through. Another one is Audacity, which just has an issue with running smoothly. So it still runs, but the level of smoothness and fluidity is a bit choppy. So that's something you'd want to keep in mind if you use those programs in particular. And finally, gaming. I think the M1 Max chip on the MacBook Pro is more than capable of gaming as well. I've tried a bit of parallels, so I've basically segmented my hard drive, which is a 1 terabyte hard drive, into 256 gigabytes for the Windows 11 counterpart. And I haven't bought the full version of Parallels, so I've just used the trial version, and pretty much everything that I need, basics on Windows, still works on the Mac, so that's pretty nice to have. If I ever want to get into hardcore gaming, and if I really want to leverage all the power for gaming, then I will consider getting Parallels on the Mac, and I'm pretty sure it's going to do fine. I've seen a lot of videos. Max Tech in particular has made tons of videos on the gaming performance of the MacBook Pro M1 Max, so definitely check that out if you want more details, and I'll also leave links to other videos down in the description. But yeah, in terms of gaming, that pretty much is one of the only reasons why any typical gaming enthusiast might not consider the MacBook Pro 16-inch M1 Max, but that aside, it's there. I've got a PS5, so I don't really need to do a lot of gaming either, so to be honest, not really a big, it's not really a big letdown for me. So yeah, I think you get the general gist of this review. It's pretty much all good and a few bad things that come down to optimization. And I also want to say the fans on the MacBook Pro 16-inch M1 Max, haven't heard them. The overheating issues, there's none whatsoever to talk about. The only time it heats up is when you're charging the MacBook Pro 16-inch, which is understandable. So it charges in about 2 hours from 0 to 100% using the 140 watt provided charger that you get from Apple. The only problem with that is when it's all the way down to 0% and you haven't opened up the lid of the MacBook Pro, it doesn't charge. So it sort of charges and then doesn't charge. And I've made a separate video altogether on that. I have linked it down in the description for you to check out, or above in the card. So that's just a minor inconvenience. I feel like that is something a software update could fix. And if you want a fix for that and you want to charge the MacBook Pro without having to open up the lid, you can use a Type-C USB cable to do so. And I'm hearing Apple is providing free Type-C USB replacements for these MacBooks if you face that issue. So I'm not really sure. That's one of the comments that I got on my previous video. But yeah, there is a workaround to that, and I'm not really concerned. But to sum up my overall experience, it's been fantastic. I love how you can be mobile with the MacBook Pro 16-inch, how you can take it around anywhere with you, and you get about 13 to 14 hours of battery life on a single charge, which for the machine is outstanding. About rendering and sort of video editing, 4K video editing, maybe that drops down to around 6 to 7 hours, which is still fantastic. And this is with things like Photoshop open in the background, After Effects open in the background, Chrome open up in the background. So all of this stuff in the background, but still some insane battery performance and great thermals, great portability, just all around a fantastic machine. So those were my thoughts on the brand new M1 Max MacBook Pro 16-inch. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments, and let me know if you're planning to pick one up. I feel like if you are, whether you're a Windows user or a Mac user, you're not going to be disappointed. If you want to go for something that's a bit in your budget, maybe consider the Pro, and perhaps that way you'll get slightly better battery life as well. But if you want all-out performance, get the M1 Max and you won't regret it whatsoever. This was Vaibhav, and I'll see you in the next one. Adios.